Most of the time when we hear the phrase, you reap what you sow, it's kind of a warning, right? It's like, don't be too mean. Don't be too judgmental. Don't be too stingy. Like, treat everybody well, because if you don't, then they might not treat you very well either, right? That's what it usually is used for. But it can also be a very good thing. If we are kind and caring, take care of others, do treat others well, and we reap what we sow, then that's a wonderful thing. And that's what we see from Ruth today. We see that her kindness and care towards her mother-in-law, Naomi, that we saw last week, comes back on her this week. Someone sees the things that she did for her mother-in-law, and he is grateful for it, and he is kind and caring to her in return. And so let's go ahead and just get into this lesson. This is Ruth 2, and it says, Naomi had a relative of her husband's family, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I might find favor. And Naomi said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Now let me explain to you what this meant. Before God ever even gave the Israelites the promised land, he set everything up perfectly for them. He said, I know that right now you have this abundant land. This is perfect land, and everything is going to be producing great, and I'm going to give each one of you your own piece of land, and it's all going to be great. But there will come a day when someone will mismanage their money, or they will fall on hard times, or there will be widows, orphans, people that need food and can't get it. And so God set up from the very start a way for them to get food. For those that for some reason can't grow their own food and have their own farm or, inherited land, that they would be able to eat. And so the way that he set this up is that every field, whenever they would go and gather all of the grain, they were supposed to leave pieces. It's like, don't pick up every single piece of grain. You have people who go through and they begin to pick this up and they bundle it up and just go at a decent pace and leave pieces there. And then also leave all of the edges to where you don't mess with them. And then all of those who are poor, who are needy, who are widows and orphans and strangers in the land that don't have their own piece of land, all of these people will then be able to go behind us and they can pick up grain for themselves. And so that's what Ruth is asking Naomi. Is it okay if I go out and do that? See if I can find a field where they will let me pick up the leftover grain. And Naomi says, yes, that would be a great idea. That's what this is for. And so it says in verse 3 that Ruth set out and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field that belonged to Boaz, who is from the clan of Elimelech, which is what we just talked about this in verse 1, where it says, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And so Ruth did not know this. She was unaware that she was going to, the man that was of their family. She didn't know that. But God knew, right? And God directed her specifically to this place. This was divine providence, that this is the field that she ended up on the very first day. And it's also not a coincidence that Boaz comes to town to check on his workers and his field that day. And so that's what we'll see in the next verse. And so it says here in verse 4, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. And then Boaz said to the young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. she came here and she said, may I please glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers? And so she came, and she's continued to be here from early in the morning until now, except for a short rest. And then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they may reap and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? When you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And so he's talking about men and women that work for him. The men would be the ones that would cut all of this grain, and the women would come behind them and they would gather it. And then also it sounds as if the men are the ones that gather all of the water. And so he says, you stay with the women, the other maidservants that are working for me. I want you to stay here with them, and you follow behind the men and get the grain with these women. And then also you can go and get the water anytime you need anything to drink. You just act like you're one of my maidservants, is basically what he says. And then in verse 10, it says, she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and she said, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, especially since I'm a foreigner? And Boaz said, this is the key to the whole lesson. This is why Boaz is being so kind to her, because she says, why have I found favor in your eyes? And he says, because all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and your mother and your native land, and you came to a people that you never knew. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, whose wings you have taken refuge. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the lesson, is that he heard her kindness and care towards Naomi. And so he is being kind and caring and protecting her and all of those things because of that. And then he not only is doing that himself, but he is asking that God return her kindness and care back on her. And he says, also, I realize that you've left not only your family and your land, but you left your gods, and you took refuge here with our God. And I want our God to reward you for that. And then in verse 13, it says that Ruth said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I'm not one of your servants. So she's basically saying, that's overwhelming to me. The way you're treating me is really giving me comfort. I'm sure that Ruth needed comfort, right? Not only did she just leave her family and her land and her gods, like we've already been told several times, but her husband just passed away, right? And so she's lost everything that she's known except for Naomi. And so she needs comfort. Ruth needs comfort. And by leaving everything that she has had and knowing that, she's kind of going out in an unknown area, obviously, but her whole future is unknown. And now in this first day of her going out to work, she feels like somebody's taking care of her, like it's all going to be okay. She's going to be able to take care of Naomi now because of Boaz. And so she's like, you have spoken so kindly to me. You are wonderful. I'm so comforted by what you're doing for me. Thank you so much. And then it says Boaz didn't stop there. In verse 14, he says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat bread and dip your morsel in the wine. And so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed her the roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and it says she even had some left over. And then when she got up to go back to work, it says that Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and don't reproach her. Also, pull some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and don't rebuke her. And so he just keeps on being kind to her. He's like, hey, I need you, stop for lunch, come and eat with us. We've got plenty of food. And they do have plenty of food because this means that, she still had some even left over. And then after she gets back up, he says, hey, she's not going to be one of the poor widows that follow behind my maidservants and get what they leave. I want her to work among the maidservants. Let her have the sheaves just like the maidservants do. And then he says, and now and then pull a little out of your bundles and drop it. Let her have as much as she can get, And so it says that she gleaned until the evening, and then she beat out what she had gleaned. And this was about an ephah of barley. This is what she got in the day. And so an ephah would have filled like a 5-gallon bucket overflowing of grain. This is how much she got, which they say would have been like 30 or 40 pounds, which would be like 2 weeks worth of grain for just her and Naomi. So in one day's time, she has gotten all of this. And this is all because of Boaz, obviously. And so it says that she took that and she went up into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she also brought out and gave her mother-in-law the food that she had left over from lunch. And then her mother-in-law said, where did you glean today? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man that took notice of you. So she realizes, she's like, oh, wow, someone did let you glean in their fields and you got a ton. Like, bless the man that allowed this from you. And so then Ruth says, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And when Naomi heard that it was Boaz, she really realized how blessed that they really were. And she says, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so when he says, that he has not forsaken the living or the dead, he's saying he hasn't forsaken us who are the living, but he also is taking care of us because he hasn't forsaken our husbands that have now passed on. He is taking some responsibility for us because he knows who we are. That's what just happened. And not only is he a relative, but he is one of our closest relatives, even to be one of our redeemers. And what that means is this is something that God also set up from the very beginning. Remember, I said that he gave this land to the Israelites that was flowing and abundant. Well, he didn't just say, go move into this land. He gave specific pieces of land to each tribe so that every single tribe would have their own piece of land. And this was to preserve them so that no tribe ever became extinct or ever intermarried with one another to where, they just became one whole Israelite tribe. It was like, I want to make sure that every single one of Jacob's children stay preserved. They are forever inheriting this land. And so one of the ways that he would do this is, the boys would inherit their father's land, and then whoever they married would come and live on that land. And so if they married with the people of the other tribes, then that woman forfeited her piece of land and came and lived on her husband's land, and that preserved her husband's name and the land that was in his name. Another way that he set it up that has to do with this kinsman redeemer is that if any man became too poor, his land maybe, didn't produce well, or his widow, or if he passed away, whatever the case may be, and he lost his land for some reason, if he had to sell it to someone, then a kinsman redeemer could redeem that land back. So that would mean their closest relative could go and buy the land back for the man if he had the means to do that. And then if no one was able to do that, then if the man eventually got the money back to buy his land back, then he could go and buy his land back. And then God also had provision that the land was never sold permanently because he did want to preserve each tribe's land. And so he said, every 50 years, we will have a time where everybody gets their land back, regardless if they're able to buy it back or not. And that was just God's way of preserving the people. And so what Naomi is saying is that, our husband's land has been lost because they're gone and we had moved away and all of those things. But this man is such a close relative that he could possibly redeem that land back. And it could be in our family again. He has that ability. And so this is for real divine providence, that God would send Ruth to Boaz's land, that Boaz would take notice of her, realize who she was, and take responsibility for her and be kind to her in return for her kindness for Naomi. So all of this has been orchestrated by the Lord. And so Naomi is telling Ruth this. She's like, oh, this is not only, is it great that you got this land, that you got this barley from the fields today, but the man that you got it from is special. He's important to our family, and this is a big blessing for us. And so then in verse 21, now that Ruth knows this, she informs her mother-in-law more, and she says, well, he also told me that you should keep close to my young men until they finished all of my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, oh, it is good, my daughter, that you should go out among the young women, lest you be assaulted in another person's field. So she's basically saying, this is good, this keeps you protected, because especially as a foreigner, and I don't have, there's no man here to protect you. It's a good thing that Boaz is also protecting you. So he really is taking care of the living and the dead by saying, I know that your husbands are gone and I'm going to protect you. And so Naomi says, this is all really, really good for us. And then in verse 23, it says, so Ruth kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. She lived with her mother-in-law there. And so remember, she came at the beginning of the barley harvest, and it says she stayed in his field until the end of the wheat harvest. And they say that was about 2 months' time between Passover and Pentecost. And so this is a couple of months that she stays in Boaz's field until both of the harvest seasons are over, and she's gotten barley and wheat out of his field.